Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining us for today's Global Chambers Monthly Import-Export Forum. I am the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBTI Services Incorporated. We connect importers, exporters, and global companies with the best currency exchange company for them based on their location and the countries they do business in and with. I am very proud to be a member of the advisory board for the Los Angeles Chamber of the Los Angeles chapter of the Global Chamber. The Global Chamber, for those of you who are new, is a growing collaborative community of CEOs, executives, and business leaders in over 525 metro regions around the world. Its mission is to foster growth in cross-border business, trade, investment, and in every region of the world by providing its members with warm introductions, valuable connections, and timely information. I invite you to put your contact information in the chat, especially the link to your LinkedIn profile. And please do include your full name so it's easier for people to find you. And by the way, don't forget to save the chat. I have done that. So let me tell you how today's forum will work. In the first half of the hour, I'll be interviewing two amazing experts. And in the second half, we'll open it up for Q&A and conversation. I want to ask everyone to please keep yourselves muted through the first part of the program as it is being recorded. Now, as the name of this webinar implies, we're all about importing and exporting. Sometimes we focus on both, and sometimes we focus on one or the other. Today, we are very lucky to have two amazing import experts from two very interesting fields. Because we have a limited time, I will read you only a fraction of their complete bios, but I urge you to look them up on LinkedIn where you can see the full spectrum of all their achievements. So, our first expert is Jermeel Lewis Johnson. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jermeel. Jermeel Lewis Johnson is a licensed customs broker. She is the founder and CEO of Just Your Broker Incorporated, a New York customs brokerage firm specializing in U.S. import and export customs clearance with a primary focus on compliance and duty drawback. Beyond her role as a licensed customs broker, Jermeel is also a certified customs specialist and an active advocate for industry education. She provides customs broker exam training as well as import-export training. Jermeel earned her bachelor's degree at Farmingdale State College, and she currently serves as a partnership co-chair on the board of OWIT New York. OWIT, O-W-I-T, is the acronym for the Organization of Women in International Trade. So welcome, Jermeel.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, you speak a little bit louder if you can, just to make sure that everybody can hear you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, yeah, thanks so much. Okay, so before we get into the more detailed questions, I've got 4 quick questions for you about your personal trajectory here. So I'm curious, how long have you been in this globally oriented line of work?
I've been almost 8 years since August 2016.
Okay, great. So 7, 8 years now, right? Going on 8 years, yeah, okay. And what got you into this line of work?
I actually wanted to change what I was doing. I was working for TSA doing airport security for close to 10 years, and I had my bachelor's degree. And I just wanted to do something different. I was tired of security, so I was just looking for jobs and applying, and I came in as a temp, and that's how it was the start of it.
It's history, as they say. Okay. So what do you like most about what you do?
I would say the research aspect of it. I'm always learning something new, so you can't really get bored when you're always learning. So I like that part.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really good. And what do you like the least about what you do?
The least is when people call me after they have a problem. So trying to help them get through it. Sometimes certain things you can't really help because they're missing paperwork. So I prefer to help people from the beginning to help them avoid penalties and fees.
Right, if they had just called you first before all of it happened, right? Yeah, okay. And that's a familiar story for sure. Okay, so now let's get into some more detailed information. What are some of the specific documentation requirements for importing goods into the United States?
Well, generally like a bill of lading, commercial invoice, packing list. That's like the basic stuff that I would say you would need. If you have an ocean shipment arrival notice, you would have to file your importer security filing. Certain things vary, but those are like general.
Okay, great. And that's just part of the normal paperwork that anybody would need, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, okay, great. And what is the process for determining the classification of imported goods under the Harmonized Tariff Schedule Code? And how can importers ensure accurate classification to comply with customs regulations on that?
Well, I always tell everyone if you want to classify, read the Informed Compliance publication on tariff classification. It's written by Customs. So read through that. Another thing that I do to make sure I'm learning how to classify a product properly is go on cbp.gov. They have webinars on there that focus on sometimes certain commodities, chapters. Watch those webinars to get familiar with the terminology. Even if it's a past webinar, those are always beneficial. Sometimes I reach out to the customs officer. They'll actually schedule a call with you. I've done it before. So take advantage of all those free resources. And you can also get a binding ruling if you're still not sure if you can classify your product properly.
Okay. Now, that website that you mentioned, after we're done talking, will you put it in the chat
Yes,
for everybody?
write it in there. No problem.
That would be great. And just so people know, since this is being recorded, all of the Global Chamber webinars get posted to the Global Chamber YouTube channel. So you can go back and find it, but you'll also get a link because you were on here today. You will get a link to the recording. So any bits of information that Jermail or Jeff give us that you may not have jotted down, but you wanted to go back and hear, you will be able to do that. Okay. In the event of customs audits, God forbid, or inspections, what measures can importers take to prepare and minimize the risk of delays and or penalties?
I would say check to make sure you have all your paperwork in order. You have record keeping requirements, make sure everything is saved. Go through like informed compliance publications such as Reasonable Care, importing into the US, read through the actual regulations, take your time, write an SOP. Always have an SOP in place on all the steps that you have to take for your products. Paperwork you have to have in order. It's just about getting organized. That's the best thing that you can do is organize everything. Hire someone that maybe specializes in that, but always know your own responsibilities because even if you hire someone else, if they don't do it properly, you're still responsible. So understand your responsibilities.
Well, what is an SOP?
Standard operating procedure. I'm so used to acronyms.
I know. Which is great when you're talking to people that already know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so standard operating procedures. Is there a particular way that those should be laid out?
Well, I'd say organize it based on maybe understand like whatever import processes you have, write down the people that are involved that they have to reach out to, write down what paperwork you should be saving for your record keeping, understanding that, save your emails, understand if you understand what documentation to save, make a checklist for it. And that checklist you could use every time, and then you can go back to it and make sure everything you go through, look over that checklist every time to make sure it's there.
Okay, all right, great. Now I know that you do training for import export. If somebody wanted somebody in their office to be trained in what they need to do for those kinds of things to protect them, do you offer that training?
Yes, we offer that training. We can most definitely go through the whole process. It's a lot of information to learn. So we always give homework because the only way I can really know you know how to do it is if you do the work yourself, and then I check it over and let you know, give you feedback. I think feedback is very important because at the end of the day, you have to do it on your own. You're not going to have someone there all the time to help you. So make sure you understand the material, take advantage of all the help you can get, maybe even hire a mentor if you need one as well.
Okay. How long does it take somebody who's just getting into importing to really get comfortable in it from what you've seen?
To get comfortable with it, it depends on the motivation of the person. Some people are going to put in more of an effort to learn the regulations. One of the things I did early on was take advantage of every opportunity to learn. So I was able to take my test because someone educated me at my job that I worked at. So I was like, oh, the opportunity's there. Let me sign up for it. He told us to ask questions. I asked a million questions. So you have to take the initiative. You can do it.
Yeah.
You put the effort in. I was able to take I did like about 5-6 months of training for my customs broker exam. And I came from, like I said, I came in as a temp, so I didn't know anything. So you have to put in the effort. If you put in the effort, you can do it. I would say minimum 6 months, maybe a little longer, but you just have to dedicate yourself to it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. All right, now we're talking about protecting yourself in the event of an audit or something worse. What are the implications of non-compliance with customs regulations?
Most definitely more examinations. They can do more inspections on your goods. You don't want them to stop all your shipments, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. There could be also things like they can restrict you from importing or exporting. You don't want that to happen because then how are you going? You have no business after that. So things like that. I would say not just a physical examination. They can also check paperwork, and you're just gonna give them more of a reason to look into things that you're doing, and that's not what you want.
Okay. Now, final question. How can importers stay informed about changes in customs regulations, trade policies, or any other factors that may impact their importation processes?
I would say sign up for those CSMS messages. I get them in my email. Sign up for those. It keeps you up to date on any changes that customs is making. Keep an eye out on the Federal Register. If your product's regulated by any government agency, file that government agency from the Federal Register so you get notifications of any changes. Read through the regulations. The regulations do change, so I always use the electronic version as my guide to whenever I'm researching something, so it's the most up to date. Read through customs bulletin. They give out a lot of information, so I would say just all those resources. Join an organization that does education on international trade. That's always a good one to do as well. I think if you take all those steps, you're doing the best that you can. At least try.
Right. And if anything goes wrong, it's a learning experience as long as it doesn't put you out of business. And even then, it's a learning experience, right?
So,
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for being my interviewee, and we'll be talking with you more in the second half of the program. So now let's switch over to Jeffrey Dar. Attorney Jeffrey Dar. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeffrey Dar. Jeffrey Dar is a principal in the law firm Dar and Newman in Los Angeles, California. He is also the chair of the Los Angeles chapter of the Global Chamber, and I love working with him on that. Jeff's diverse experience includes strategic planning, complex state and federal litigation, and innovative dispute resolution. But the reason he's talking with us today is because of his experience with international transactions and disputes. Jeff has a close working relationship with lawyers throughout Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and this permits him to assemble international legal teams to provide innovative global solutions for transactions and business disputes. Jeff is a panelist for the American Arbitration Association as an arbitrator. He is the immediate past chair of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Committee of the California Lawyers Association and a past chair of the State Bar of California International Law Section and the International Law Section of the Los Angeles County Bar Association. That's a lot to say, but that's a lot to do. Thank you for being here, Jeff.
Great to be here, Anita, and great to be on this panel.
Thank you. All righty. So before we dive into the specifics of what you do, I'll ask you the same 4 questions that I asked Jermail, because I just want to know a little bit more about how you got into this. So how long have you been in this globally oriented line of work?
Great question. So for me personally, I started off as a lawyer 40 years ago. No comment beyond that. My first 15 years of practice really did not focus on cross-border international. It at times would stray into it. I used to be an insurance regulatory attorney. And so when I dealt with offshore insurance companies and reinsurance disputes, which often involved other countries, that would be my limited international. And so short story is about 25 years ago, was for a bunch of reasons, wanting to change my specialization in the business of insurance. And I made a conscious decision at my firm with others to develop a global practice and to really sort of totally expand into international. And 25 years later, it's a majority of what I do every day. So that's sort of the short version of, how long have I got into the work? And I work closely with lawyers in 30 plus countries. I have clients everywhere at times, many clients from other countries. And so that's why I'm here.
Okay, awesome. And that answered both the first and the second question. So thank you for that. What do you like the most about what you do? I think I can guess, but go ahead.
What I like most about what I do is the added dimension of international with regard to legal and business issues. And what I mean by that, you have the added issues of, not only just regular, domestic stuff, but you're dealing with people from one or more other countries, maybe different cultures, languages, legal systems. How do you make things work with the added dimension of you're not just limited to what you're doing in your own country? So that's the part that I sort of love. And it's just another dimension that you have to add on to having good background in the core basics of your own country.
Yeah, very true. Very true. All right. And then the flip side of that is, what do you like the least about what you do?
Well, on this one, I'm going to say, maybe it sounds pat, but it's not. Nothing. Unlike what we heard earlier, I like problems because that's what I do for a profession. I'm a problem solver. I like challenges. Other party people's headaches are the things what I thrive on and helping them with. So other than maybe we all like to think we don't have enough free time, so we work too much. Other than that, maybe I like everything I do, and particularly when it comes to international, I just love interacting with different people from around the world, and having to deal with issues of just communications and everything else. So that's what I thrive on. So I really enjoy it all when it comes to the international in particular.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, good to hear it. Because if you don't like what you do, then why do it, right? Okay. So you've touched on a little bit, but tell us briefly about the different types of things you do in assisting importers of goods.
So what I do in particular is sort of the things I've already touched on. I help them do their business properly, import or export, obviously, because I do both sides, not just focus on import. Excuse me for a minute, second. The lights on my room. Oops. In my office, the lights turn off if I don't move. So lights are back on. So what do I do to help? So particularly with importers, I help them more often when they come to me is when they have problems. I help them then maybe if they don't have good systems in place, following on some of the tips we heard from the export side in particular. But usually I hear from them when they have a problem. I help them resolve the problem. I help them deal with whether it's compliance issues or disputes over the goods or money transfers. And I'll touch on some of those more in a moment.
Okay, great. So from a legal perspective, are there issues that you believe importers should be particularly aware of when importing goods, such as having a dispute heard by a court versus by arbitration?
Yes, and so let me briefly just explain the background of that and why it's worth knowing as a business person, sort of the general concept. So when you are doing deals, you have it in the back of your mind, and hopefully more in the forefront of your mind, as how you structure your importing of goods, because you're dealing with money and by definition, two or more countries. So if you do nothing, you're going to have the default of a court being the one who would determine if there's a dispute over the goods that you may be importing. And it may be that you didn't get the goods, they're not good quality, money issues. If you have to go to a court, you're going to find out very quickly that a court judgment you may be able to obtain, and maybe what you expressly put in your invoices as some of the terms. But when it comes to going after the other side, who may have, for example, they didn't provide you with goods and they owe you the money you gave them, just one example, you then need to go to their home country and ask a court there to recognize your judgment in your home country. And there's no treaties, that may not happen. On the other hand, international arbitration, which of commercial disputes, there's been a treaty, unlike judgments where there's really no effective global treaty, going back to the 1950s with virtually every country you could think of being a party. And what that means is that parties will know that you'll have a private arbitration. You can pick people, by the way, who have expertise in import-export of goods versus somebody who may know nothing about the subject. In addition, the resulting award, like a judgment from a court, will be treated in a uniform way as to being recognized where the other parties and you are located, so that it's predictable what will happen. What that means is that people will more likely perform because they'll know they'll be held accountable versus come and get me, good luck to you. So that's sort of the quick takeaway of why that's important.
Okay, all right, awesome. Now, let's talk briefly about the Convention on the International Sale of Goods. Can you explain why importers should be aware of this particular treaty?
So first, let me just ask a quick, I know everyone's muted and I don't see visual, but I will ask and you don't need to respond, but if you can, great. So I can see how many people even know what the question asked about, which was the Convention on the International Sale of Goods, commonly referred to because it's a mouthful, CISG, or the Vienna Convention. I see one hand, two hands, one wavering a little bit. Don't know about the others, but here's what's worth knowing about it and why the fact that you don't know about it is not a surprise to me, because it's commonly just not known. So first of all, the Convention on the International Sale of Goods, the CISG for short, sometimes called the Vienna Convention, Vienna Sales Convention. It's been around since 1980. And what's important about it is it basically provides an international treaty of a common body of law over the sale of goods, where last count, I believe 97 different countries have signed on to the treaty. So most places you would be importing goods from or exporting are probably members of this treaty. So for those of us, for example, in the United States, most states or all states have a different variation of a uniform commercial, the UCC, a uniform commercial code dealing with the sale of goods. Well, if you're doing export-import, probably this convention I'm talking about is the one that actually applies, and most of you probably never heard of it. That's why I'm mentioning it. So real quick, so 97 countries, notable ones not would be the United Kingdom, most of Africa, and Venezuela. But otherwise, virtually anyone you're going to do business with is a party to this treaty. And the way it works, which is the part that's worth knowing, if the parties don't specify that they are excluding the application of the CISG, it applies. So in silence, because it's a treaty and it becomes, for example, if you're in the United States, the law of your state, that's the law of your agreement when it comes to a dispute over the quality of the goods. Again, most people aren't aware of this. So is a transaction within the scope of the CISG? Basically, under the US version, and gets a little complicated to different countries, but if you have a sale of goods where each party is in a different nation that's adopted the CISG, unless it's excluded, it applies. And so as an example, just because I'm a lawyer, not everyone's a lawyer, obviously, most of us are not, is if a buyer's located in the United States, seller's located in China, guess what? Unless you expressly say the CISG does not apply, and I'm not suggesting you do that, it applies. The types of things that are excluded from the CISG, and quick passing, there's a number of other ones that I'll mention. Consumer purchases, not going to be likely what we're dealing with here. Sales of vessels, hovercraft, aircraft, electricity, probably not what you're importing. And the sales of specially fabricated goods, for which a substantial part of the input materials are supplied by the buyer, that would be excluded. But otherwise, it's going to cover the basic import of all your goods unless you exclude it. Things that, just to have in the back of your mind to know, I should know more about this and look at it in the future. The CISG would not cover everything in the sale of goods. It doesn't cover issues of the validity, such as a mistake or unconscionability in an import of goods issue. It doesn't cover questions of title, local law will, and it doesn't deal with questions that may be resolved by a choice of law under the contract. But under the CISG, this is important for importing and exporting. Buyers have general rights to specific performance. So you can, as a buyer, let's say you're the importer, require performance by the seller of his or her obligations unless the buyer has resorted to a remedy which is inconsistent with that specific performance provision. The seller may also require the buyer to pay the price, take delivery, or perform his or her obligations unless the sellers resort to a remedy which is inconsistent with that obligation. And so there's a lot of things that are worth knowing about. The CISG also for remedies for breaches. There's an article that provides a rule for awarding expectation damages, which goes a little further beyond maybe what an invoice provides. It also provides for consequential damages, damages that are foreseeable arising from a possible consequence or breach, so getting additional damages. A buyer, so here the importer, may reduce the price under one of the articles, Article 50, if goods are non-conforming, which is an important one to know. And the parties are still free to craft their own remedies, and you may get interest. So just a very, very quick education about something that's sort of, basics to me, but most people, most lawyers are clueless about. And that's because it's a treaty. And I will say, just to make everyone feel better, if you're like, first time I really heard about this, if I were to do a similar poll of most lawyers in any country that isn't focused on cross-border business, they probably will also look at you as if I have no idea what you're talking about. So that's why I'm giving you the gift of a little bit of knowledge so you can be aware of it and look into it a little bit more. Maybe we could have a whole conversation about it sometime at Global Chamber.
No, it's fascinating, and I've been jotting down questions. I will save them for the second part of the program. Somebody else may ask them first, but wow, like mind blowing. Okay, last question for you here before we switch to Q&A. Can you share with us just a couple of the mistakes that you see being made?
So on the import side, no particular order, I'm just going to give 5 really quick examples that I see as the person. I usually see, by the way, the problems, right? I don't see when things go right unless they're clients of mine, and I have freight forwarder and custom broker clients. But unless they are asking me for some general advice or something, I usually see when there's a problem, just to put that in mind, right? It's like all things. I have a distorted view because I only see the 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100, the ones that don't have, go smooth. So things that I've just seen that I thought were worth noting. Parties don't put the wrong country of origin when they mark their import documents. They don't declare when there's a dispute, and it matters now, the correct value of the imported goods. It's like, well, that's what you said they were, and now you're telling me they're different because they are. Incoterms. Incoterms, I think everyone here is probably have some general familiarity with, and it's easy to find them all, but I see them all the time being used, and they're being used in ways that make no sense, or the person who used them is copying them and doesn't understand what they were. They just see them. And so therefore they're using Incoterms that, may apply because that's what the parties put in their contract, but they don't make sense. Or if they actually looked at what they were, they maybe would have thought it through a little different. Fourth one, I made a little quick list because I got a preview from Anita. She may ask me this question. Not having, and this is something you heard already, detailed commercial invoices. The things that I've seen when I think of the problems I have, and they're often my client may have them as a problem. It's like, well, this is a problem. The details of the product aren't really set forth properly when it comes to, okay, what were the goods you were, importing or exporting? The details of where manufacture took place, which can be very important for a whole bunch of different reasons, where products were made, and surprisingly, the quantity, where it's like, well, we left out the quantity, and you could, put that together maybe, but it would be nice if it's 100 widgets, it says 100 widgets versus widgets, just to be very simple.
How hard is that?
And the last one, which everyone probably should appreciate, is since I'm not a customs broker or a freight forwarder, but clients who are, having a good freight forwarder and a customs broker on your team, so you don't need someone like me, hopefully.
Well, fun. And now you know why I included Jermil in this conversation. With regard to Incoterms, I had never heard the term before until there was a Global Chamber webinar on Incoterms. So Doug might know the date more than me, but if you go back to the YouTube channel for the Global Chamber, you will find one of those presentations, and it was eye-opening. It's, all of these regulations and things, most of them come about to try and alleviate the problems from not having them. So, your job as an importer is to make sure you know what's required, and then it should be smoother sailing. Not going to say smooth, it's never smooth, right?
Yeah, and I will just share because I have been involved with trainings on the types of things we're talking about today at courses offered in the Los Angeles area for people on importing, exporting, and it'll include Incoterms. I don't hold myself out as an expert on Incoterms because I'm more the lawyer, but I'm familiar with them. But there are cheat sheets. You can go and download tables because I see them all the time, which will give you, here's the Incoterms, and you have to look at make sure you're dealing with the right time period because the Incoterms change, by the way. So the Incoterms of the 2020s may not be the ones of the 2019. So if you're looking at a contract with older Incoterms and things, you may need to do a little homework if you aren't real expert on them. But you can look at them and you can make sure that you understand the basic ones that may apply to the issues of like when does title transfer and who has liability and exposure for goods when they're in transit, which is a real common dispute. And the Incoterms will address that, but people often don't know what they're putting in or what they mean.
That's scary. Okay. And that's why they need both you and Jamil. Okay, so thank you so much. That was incredibly informative. And now I want to open it up to Q&A, comments, whatever. I'm going to switch back to gallery view so I can see everybody. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Just raise your hand since I may not see everybody. Oh, we do have, okay, so we have enough people. I can see all the squares. Either like wave your hand or raise your virtual hand. Alt Y will raise your virtual hand, and that pops you up on the left side of my screen so I know that you have a question. So feel free to unmute yourselves. And while I'm waiting for everybody, I have a quick question for you, Jeff.
Okay.
2 questions.
Hopefully I have an answer.
No, I'm sure you do. I have faith in you. So you said that the Incoterms, they change every year, and that makes perfect sense. How often is the treaty updated?
So Incoterms, I believe, change and are reviewed every, I think, decade approximately. So I don't know if they change necessarily every year, but you need to check. On the treaty, on the 2 treaties I actually made reference to, and there's quite a few treaties for people who import export that people should be aware of. And again, frankly, most lawyers are clueless because they're not in the books that they would normally use for what are the laws of their state, of their treaties. Even though in the United States, for example, a treaty becomes the law of the state. So without getting fancy into it, so it is the law of California, for example, the CISG, the number of lawyers who even know what it is, let alone it exists, is probably really, really tiny. So the CISG doesn't really change. What changes for purposes of any of us to know is depending upon what country you're dealing with, it's easy to find out if they're a member of the CISG. So whether or not, and I'm not getting into whether or not you should exclude it or not, but it will be the default. But there are a handful of countries, if you really want to know, who will accept the treaty, but they'll have small little changes which they're allowed to make. But generally, the treaty remains the same since 1980, but it gets tweaked, but not in a substantive way. And the one I mentioned from the 1950s, which is called the New York Convention, they all have these wonderful names. This is one that deals with international arbitration awards. That one basically is implemented by the local country. So like in the United States, it's part of our federal statutes, but it's a treaty. And maybe a good super short example, a very recent one just resolved like in the last month or so. I have a client, so importing millions of dollars of products from Malaysia. They got money from their client for the goods, sent the money to the manufacturer. And this was during COVID, and no product sent. Basically, the importer left holding the bag like a middleman. And so because they had no arbitration agreement, which would have been one simple way of resolving this, had they had that foresight, they had to go to Malaysia, where the other party has their money, hire a lawyer and bring a lawsuit in the country. They could have sued them here, but you'd have to go to Malaysia anyways at the end of the day. had they had an arbitration clause, maybe would have been much simpler and been resolved already.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Does anybody have any questions for anybody, for either of our speakers? If not, I have another one. Is this sound familiar to any of you that are, in import export? Tonight, I think you had put a comment in there and somebody else had put a comment. So some of you are familiar with some of the terminology. Have any of you run into any problems that either Jermail or Jeff has made a reference to?
Yeah, Leslie August in the room is really one of the most experienced people, import, export, both, and in trade overall. Definitely somebody to follow and to know. Leslie, I don't know if you're available just to introduce yourself, but would you be open to just saying a few words? And what's your reaction to Jermail's and Jeff's conversation? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here, Doug.
Cool. What's your reaction to what you're hearing here today? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's all great information. I mean, you've got the basics of what you need to do to import from Jermail. She's spot on. I think, the biggest takeaway for anybody new to importing or who's in a new responsibility for compliance in importing. She talked about being organized and record keeping. That's so critical. That's a huge piece of it. So it was great that she brought that out. And then on the legal side and resolving, international disputes, there's nothing like having a specialist who's done it before and who is familiar with those international treaties and how those disputes get resolved. Because, sometimes your partner overseas doesn't do it the way you expect it to be done. And so, I think Jeff bringing the CISG information forward is really, really interesting. And the fact that just understanding that the rules and laws that dictate international transactions are going to be different than if you have a domestic transaction. So be prepared for that. I think, all really good information, and really appreciate you highlighting these two experts in their field. I just coincidentally, Jermail and I we met earlier today. So she and I have been talking the past couple of weeks, gratefully through a connection I think you made, Doug, between the two of us. So I've been hearing her history and what she's doing and who she's working with, and have a lot of respect for that and what she's got, off the ground since she started her own business and all. So so I think that's all I can really add right now.
Well, that's a lot, actually. Thank you so much for that. I'm so glad that you're on today. So you mentioned talking with Jermail. I was going to ask Jermail, what countries are there countries where the majority of your clients tend to import from, or what's the spectrum like, so we know what you're dealing with?
I would say the biggest ones are China, but usually still with China. And then when I was doing plants a lot, it was all coming from Indonesia. So I would say those stand out the most to me.
And so I had asked Jeff a couple of the mistakes he sees along the way. What was like the worst experience that you had to rescue somebody from?
There was someone that they imported, I forgot what country in Africa, imported a container that was already on the water. The ISF wasn't filed. They didn't know how to classify any of their goods. So it took a long time trying to figure out all the classifications, because a lot of the things I wasn't familiar with. So it took a while just to figure that out, just to file the ISF. And then once it arrived, it actually went on hold. we needed to get the label. So it was a lot of problems. And the trucker decided he couldn't pick it up last minute. It was already on hold and all this storage we're trying to avoid. So then I had to scramble to find another trucker last minute because we didn't want to pay anymore. It was a big mess.
Oh my God. And so you did not sleep for several nights, I assume? Like that's gotta be, it's a nail biter.
It's just a headache, worried about it every day to make sure it wasn't any more problems.
Yeah. Have you ever had a container like rejected, like turned back, sent back?
No, I haven't. I've actually had someone come up to me and I think they imported shrimp. I forgot from where, and they didn't have a permit or none of the papers. So I was like, yeah, I can't even do anything for you with this because I can't clear it. You need your paperwork. So that's the only thing that I've rejected myself because I didn't have anything to clear it with. So other than
Okay.
there's been nothing rejected, at least on my end, luckily.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Jeff, you mentioned that the UK is not a party to the treaty. Fernando will get to you in just a second. You'll be next. The UK has always kind of marched their own drum, but in this instance, why is it that you think, or you may know, that they're not a party to the treaty?
Oh God, you're testing my memory. They haven't been a member of the treaty from the beginning expressly, so it's not as if I understand that, still may be, to my understanding, and it may just be because they're different. I know I've read the answer to your question, at least, and I've spoken on the CISG in the past a number of times,
Yeah.
but they just aren't, and that's the only reason why it's really worth noting, because, of the current 97 nations, well, just to give a little background, so not that long ago, there were 70 nations. And the reason I know that fact is because I speak on the topic and I have PowerPoints on the topic of CISG. And I have one from maybe 10 years ago where it was only 70. So we now have 97. So more countries are joining. So that's the trend. However, there are areas, like I said, Africa, and there are countries that have adopted the CISG but never implemented it. So it's sort of technically, you can say that yes, they've ratified it, but they really haven't done anything to make it meaningful. So it's just worth doing a little homework when you're dealing with specific places, and that's one of the reasons why you noted earlier that I do the type of work I do because I have very close personal relationships with lawyers in many countries. So if I don't know someone somewhere, I can probably find somebody really easily. But I probably know lawyers in a lot of places, and I regularly deal with like in 30 countries. So that's how, as a U.S. based attorney, I know enough to know when to ask and spot an issue. But I have people I would contact who would give me a little more. And when it comes to the treaties, it's easy to check online, by the way, all the things I told you, because there's a central place you'll find on the internet in a moment that tells you every country that's contracted, for example, with the Convention on the International Sale of Goods. So that part makes it really easy. And it'll even give you the little annotation as to if there's any exceptions worth knowing about.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Fernando in Madrid.
Buenas
US.
noches.
Buenas
Hello.
noches.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. I'm Fernando Penteado. As you see here, I have a little bit of experience in logistics with these DHLs and so on here. And I'm based in Madrid, but I'm Brazilian and working in Latin America for quite so long. My question is to Jeff about here in Europe and in Latin America, we talk a lot about the economic authorized operator. So it's a certification that most of the European companies try to get from their operations. Is there any change? And maybe Jeremy can also talk about that. Is there any changes when a company is an authorized economic operator or not? Is there any changes in the customs when the company has those certifications, or changes in the way that the customs is looking at the processes, especially in the US now?
I think I got the question. For full disclosure, one area that I don't specialize in is the navigating of issues with with the customs of the countries. And for that, I actually have a law firm that is probably the best in the world who I regularly work with and bring in. So when goods are being held up, seized, because I get cases where part of the strategy of the business is to seize goods, or if there's counterfeit goods at issue. I get involved with every aspect, but bring in as a specialist, and that's not me, the people who then deal with getting the experience of how do we get goods released, or how do we deal with impound, or how do we deal with other problems. So unfortunately, if I heard the question right, it's a little hard to hear for me. Sorry. That's how I would approach it, and I can't give you the right answer, unfortunately.
Jermail, thank you, Jeff. Jermail, did you want to jump in on?
In reference to seized goods, it's always been a trade lawyer that's been involved if it's seized. If there's anything else in reference to maybe like an FBA hold, they usually have a compliance team at the importer side that usually deals with that issue. I've never, all I've done is coordinate any extensions and things like that I've done to help out.
Yeah, but one of the claims of the authorized economic operator for the European Union is that you're having more easy processes on the customers, on the customs, to release the goods into the ports and so on. But my idea is that, is there any changes on the commercial terms that affects these let's say when there's an authorized economic operator, because an authorized economic operator is like the non-shipper in US, right? It's a kind of certification. So my question is that, is there any difference when you are deal with a problem or in a supplier that's certified or not? So that's more or less my question. Yeah.
No, I've never seen any difference. The only thing you could do, I think you're talking about the CTPAT, was it Customs Trade Partners? I forgot the rest of the acronym, but it sounds like that's what you're talking about. That helps expedite any issues if you have any, but there's no difference in the processes. Everything that I do on my end is still the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add, if I got the gist of the question correct, you can help manage and have predictability by making sure that in your invoices you have basics such as where will and how will a dispute be heard if you have one that's not, if it's with customs, like I said, I have somebody a couple of people I work with, and that's what they do. But if it's between you and, for example, the importer and the exporter, or some middle person, or whatever it may be, you can manage all that by having good, thought out basic terms in your invoices or your agreements as to what choice of law may apply, where the dispute may be heard, so that when it comes to dealing with something going wrong, maybe customs, or you have it worked out with the parties who are going back and forth with the actual goods themselves. So you have some idea, and using the right Incoterms. That's one of the ones I've had those issues where it's like, okay, the goods don't come, and when do they transfer title? Basic stuff, and the parties didn't really think it through correctly, and parties find out that they have liability before the goods even hit the shores of their country, because they agreed to having them get title before they even saw the goods or could see the goods when they go off on a boat or a plane. So you can avoid a lot of disputes by knowing what you're doing. And
yeah, Incoterms is definitely a very important point. Santosh is telling that in India, authorized economic operators have the privilege in customs clearance in exports. So okay, it's yeah, because I think it's more strong in Europe countries and Latin America. I don't see that in US there's any difference for the authorized economic operator. So that's why more or less my question. Because for example,
Fernando?
when I export to
So I think that,
Leslie,
yeah, hi. I think that there's no formal mutual recognition agreement between the EU or any of the European customs unions and the US, like there is between the North American customs unions. So US, Canada, and Mexico all recognize shippers that are in their, whatever they call their authorized economic operator program. So in the US, it's CTPAT, right? But you don't really get that benefit between the EU and the US because there's no mutual recognition there yet. I know they've talked about it for a long time, but I don't think it's ever been formally adopted.
Mhm.
And in
Okay.
terms of like the benefits, if you had a European shipper who was supplying to a US company, and that shipper from the EU is complying with the CTPAT requirements that the buyer has in the US, that the only thing that really does is make that supplier able to do business with the buyer in the US. It doesn't really help as far as customs clearance or expediting anything is concerned. And
Mhm.
if there was a huge supply chain issue and your buyer in the US was CTPAT authorized, certified,
Okay.
then the seller would have, just by virtue of that connection, would have easier access to customs clearance in the US. But it's like those people get to the front of the line and everybody that's not CTPAT certified is at the back of the line.
Mhm. Okay, good, interesting. Very good, thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to wrap it up now so that we finish right on time. Now's your last opportunity to save that chat. If you haven't saved the chat, make sure your information is in there, and do use your full names, because some people use initials for their last name for the names on their squares, and that's fine. But for people to find you, I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with people putting their full names so we can find you. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us today at the Global Chambers Import-Export Forum, and special thanks to our two import experts, Jermail Lewis Johnson and Jeffrey Dar, whose knowledge is extremely impressive. If you enjoyed today's discussion, I hope you'll join us again next month at the same time on the fourth Thursday, which happens to be February 22nd. Be sure to check out the events calendar on the website globalchamber.org for the many webinars and occasional live events going on every day around the world. So take care. We'll see you next month. And remember, it's great to be global.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Anita.
Anita.
Excellent, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff and Jermail. Great job.
Yeah.